This is Mr. Marcus, and today we are talking about something that most men only figure out after it is already too late to do anything useful about it. And I want to be upfront with you from the very first sentence. This is not a bitter conversation. This is not a man venting about his ex-wife. This is a straight, honest look at the one contract most men sign with more excitement than they have ever felt in their lives, and less understanding of what they actually agreed to than they had when they signed their first apartment lease. That contract is marriage, and the specific thing about it that nobody talks about clearly enough is this. It is the only agreement a man can enter where doing everything right, working hard, staying faithful, showing up every single day without fail, still leaves him completely exposed when things fall apart. Not because he was a bad husband, because he was a good one, because he built something, because he actually tried. And that is what we are getting into today. Think about any other serious agreement you have ever signed. A job contract, a business deal, a loan, a lease on an apartment. Every single one of those agreements operates on the same basic logic. If you hold up your end, the contract protects you. Your performance is your protection. That is just how agreements between adults are supposed to work. You do what you said you would do, and the thing you signed works in your favor. Marriage does not work that way, and the gap between what men think they are agreeing to and what the document actually does when things go wrong, that gap is where the real damage happens. That is what we need to walk through honestly today, because almost nobody does it before men need to hear it. They get proposal advice and venue recommendations and everybody around them telling them this is the best decision of their life. What they do not get is a clear look at what they are actually signing before they sign it. So stay with me. Here is something that almost nobody does before they get married. They do not read the contract, not the actual one. They read the romantic version of it, the one that lives in movies and in the way people around them talk about marriage like it is just the natural next step. Like it is what you do when you find the right person and feel ready. That version of the contract says, find someone you love, commit to each other, build something together, and if you are both decent people who put in the work, it works out. That version feels true. That version is what men are operating from when they get down on one knee. But that version is not the legal document they sign. The legal document is written by the state, not by the two people getting married, not by their values or their intentions or their understanding of what this relationship means to them, by the state. And the state has very specific ideas about how that contract ends, how assets get split, what financial obligations survive the relationship ending, and who carries the bigger exposure when things fall apart. And when you look at those specifics honestly, what you find is a contract that is structurally tilted against men in ways that have nothing to do with how good a husband they were. Most men do not find this out until they are already sitting in a lawyer's office trying to understand why the house they paid for is being negotiated over. That is when the contract reveals itself, and by then, it is too late to go back and read it first. A study found that nearly 70% of divorces are filed by women, not by men who stopped caring, not by men who walked out or gave up, by women, which means in the majority of marriages that end, the man did not choose to end it. The ending was chosen for him, and then the same system that did not ask his opinion on whether the marriage should be overturned around and asked him to hand over a significant portion of everything he spent years building, potentially pay financial support for years after the relationship ended, and see his kids on a schedule that someone else approved. That is the contract. That is what the document actually contains. And almost no man has read it by the time he signs it. Now let me tell you about the first thing marriage quietly takes from a man. Because it is not the obvious thing, it is not the money or the legal exposure, it comes before any of that, and most men do not even notice it leaving. It is their time. Their freedom to make their own decisions without running them past anyone. Before marriage, a man's day belongs to him. His Saturday morning is his. His Sunday is his. If he wants to spend money on something he wants, he spends it. If he wants to change his plans last minute, he changes them. If he wants to stay out with his friends or stay home and do nothing, that is entirely his call. Nobody needs to be consulted. Nobody needs to approve it. And the thing about freedom is that you never appreciate it fully when you have it. You only feel it clearly when it is gone. Marriage removes that freedom. Not in one big conversation where someone says from now on everything gets checked. It happens in small steps. A comment here, a look there. A disagreement that goes on long enough that it becomes easier to just ask. First, next time. And before a man fully understands what shifted, he is running every decision through a filter he never agreed to install. Where are you going? How long will you be? Why do you need that? Why is that the priority right now? And again, this is not always about the woman being unreasonable. Sometimes it is just what happens when two people live that close to each other. But the cost of that closeness lands differently on men than it does on women. And women tend to expand into shared life. Men tend to contract. The space that was theirs gets smaller. And most men cannot point to the exact moment that happened. They just notice one day that the life they are living does not feel fully like their own anymore. And layered on top of losing that freedom is the job description nobody showed them. Because marriage comes with a detailed set of expectations that nobody actually lays out before you start. You discover them on the job, through the sighs, through the comments, through the things that keep coming up until you understand this is something you are expected to handle. You are the provider. That part most men expect. But it goes much further than that. You are the one who handles anything physical, anything uncomfortable, anything that has to do with the outside world or the car or the heavy lifting or the calls that nobody else wants to make. You are expected to be emotionally steady, no matter what is happening in your own head. Whatever stress you are carrying, whatever private worry is sitting in the back of your mind, you hold it together. Because someone needs to be steady, and that someone is you. And then there is the home itself. Because for most women, the home is personal in a way that is hard for most men to fully understand. It is an expression of who she is, the way it looks, the way it is kept, the cleanliness standard, the decorating decision, the constant refreshing and upgrading. All of that matters to her at a deep level. For most men, a home is just where they live. It works, or it does not. It is clean enough, or it needs cleaning. It is not a statement about who they are. But living in her home means living by her standards, whether you chose those standards or not. And the alternative to meeting those standards is the ongoing friction that comes from not meeting them. The comments, the disappointment, the particular kind of low-level tension that fills a shared space when one person feels their home is not being treated the way it should be. Most men, after a while, find it simply easier to meet the standard than to have the conversation about the standard for the 5th time. That is how the job description fills in. Not through one big talk, through 100 small moments of it being easier to comply than to push back. Now, let us talk about money, because this is where things get particularly important to understand. Men care about financial independence deeply, not just about having money, but about the ability to make decisions with their money without justifying every single one. That is tied to how most men feel about themselves. It is tied to their sense of being in control of their own direction. And marriage removes it. Not all at once, not obviously, but over time, financial decisions stop being individual decisions and become negotiations. And those negotiations do not happen on even ground. Because on one side is your financial logic, saving more, investing, staying ahead, thinking 10 years out. And on the other side is the emotional weight of what she wants. The vacation she has been looking forward to, the thing for the house that really needs updating, the purchase that matters to her in ways she finds hard to explain but feels strongly about. And here's the part that is honest but uncomfortable to say. The emotional pressure of those wants is real. When the person you share your home and your bed and your daily life with is unhappy about not getting what she wants, you feel it constantly. You feel it at dinner. You feel it in the silence. You feel it in a dozen small ways that make your home feel like a place you do not want to be. And most men, at some point, make a quiet private calculation. It is cheaper emotionally to just let this happen than to fight about it every single time. So, the vacation happens. The purchase happens. The financial goal you had gets pushed to later. One compromise at a time. One quiet surrender at a time. Until a man looks at where his finances actually are and realizes his future looks nothing like what he planned because the money kept going somewhere else. And none of that history matters in a divorce. The number just gets divided. The years of financial compromise, the goals he set aside to keep the peace. None of that comes back. Then there is the part of marriage that catches men most completely off guard. When you build real intimacy with someone, when you actually let them in, you show them things you do not show other people. Your real fears. The stuff that keeps you up at night. The things you feel insecure about. The moments when you are not confident or certain or strong. You let them see that, because that is what closeness is. That is the whole point of it. And in a marriage that is working, that vulnerability is safe. It stays exactly where you put it. But in a marriage that starts going wrong, all of that becomes something else. Not always deliberately, not always as a calculated strategy, but the information is there, and it gets used. She knows which words land hardest. She knows which comparison stings most. She knows exactly which insecurity to press, because nobody else was ever that close to it. The silent treatment that makes you scramble to figure out what you did wrong. The specific criticism that targets something you told her in a quiet moment years ago. The comparison to someone else that is designed to make you question whether you are enough. And the reason it works so completely is because she learned all of it from you, from the version of yourself you chose to trust her with. Men describe this experience as feeling like someone is using your own notes against you in an argument, where every move they make connects because they know exactly where the real things are. And it is coming from the one person you thought that information was completely safe with. And here is what makes all of this especially difficult to deal with. The longer you stay in a marriage, the harder it becomes to leave. And the harder it becomes to leave, the more you stay. Every year that passes adds another layer to what getting out would cost. Another year of finances tied together. Another year of kids getting older and more settled in the life the marriage created. Another year of assets growing that are now jointly owned by someone who may not agree that things need to end. It is like building something large and complicated in a space, and then realizing you need to dismantle it. You cannot just walk out. Everything you built is in the way, and pulling one piece out means dealing with everything that is attached to it. This is why men stay in marriages they have been quietly unhappy in for years. Not weakness, not fear of change, but because when they actually look at what leaving costs, losing half of everything they spent years building, losing daily life with their kids, possibly sending money every month for years after the marriage is legally finished, starting over financially in their 40s or 50s, from a position significantly worse than where they started. Staying starts to feel survivable by comparison, even when staying is slowly making them miserable every single day. And what happens to a man who lives in that situation long enough is that the misery stops registering as misery. It just starts feeling like this is what life is. He stops expecting things to feel different because somewhere along the way, he stopped believing they could. That quiet giving up, that is one of the most damaging things a bad marriage does to a man. Not the loud falling apart moments. That slow, quiet thing where he just accepts it. Now let us talk about the legal mechanics, because this is the piece most men genuinely do not understand until they are sitting across from a lawyer. The law does not measure how hard you tried. It does not reward loyalty. It does not look at who worked more overtime, who passed up opportunities to stay present for the family, who kept every promise they made. It looks at what exists and divides it. The man who built more divides more. If you paid for a house before the marriage, in many places it can still be treated as a marital asset after enough years together. If you built a business during the marriage, even if your wife had no involvement in running it, the value of that business may be on the table. If you earned significantly more than she did over the course of the marriage, you may owe payments that continue long after the marriage itself is finished. The marriage is over. The relationship is done. And money is still moving from your account to hers every month. Not because the marriage is working, because it existed, because you were in it. And in most places today, the law is no fault, which sounds fair on paper. Nobody is the villain. Nobody gets punished for their behavior. But what it actually means in practice is that the man who stayed faithful, who worked hard, who never gave anyone a reason to file, gets treated exactly the same as the man who did everything wrong. Same division, same outcome. Behavior inside the marriage does not change the math of how the marriage ends. That is the contract. And most men had no idea. Every man who ends up here eventually asks himself the same question. How did I not see this coming? Because the woman he was with before marriage seemed completely different. easier to be around, more agreeable, happy to go with his plans, genuinely interested in what he was interested in. And then, somewhere after the commitment was made, things started shifting, not dramatically at first. Slowly, the things she used to overlook became something she mentioned. The standard she never brought up became the standard he was suddenly being measured against. The independence she seemed comfortable with started creating friction, and he is sitting there wondering what changed. The honest answer is that during the time before the commitment, both people are performing, not necessarily lying, not necessarily planning anything, just behaving the way people behave when they are still trying to win something, when there is still something to prove and something to lose. The rough edges get smoothed down. The harder demands stay quiet. The less appealing standards get set aside for now, because right now the goal is to land the relationship, and everything that might complicate that gets moderated once the commitment is locked in. Once the legal structure is in place and the motivation to perform disappears, the real version starts coming forward, gradually. And the man who thought he knew exactly who he was choosing finds out that the dating version and the married version are very different people. And by the time that is clear, he is already fully committed. So where does this leave men? For the men who have not made this decision yet, build your life first. Build it until it is completely yours, before anyone else has a hand in shaping it. Your finances, your habits, your living situation, all of it should be stable and working before you give anyone access to it. Because a man who marries before he has built anything is giving someone a legal claim on everything that gets built from that point forward. Look hard at who you are actually choosing. Not just whether she is enjoyable to be around, not just whether there is chemistry. Look at how she deals with money. Look at how she handles not getting what she wants. Look at how she talks about the men who came before you. Look at whether she takes responsibility for things in her own life, or whether problems tend to be someone else's fault. You are not choosing someone for the good year. You are choosing someone who will have legal access to your entire life, for as long as the marriage lasts and potentially beyond it. That decision deserves far more honest scrutiny than most men give it. Get a prenuptial agreement, not because you expect things to fall apart, because you are an adult who understands what he is walking into. A woman who genuinely has good intentions and honest motivations should be willing to have that conversation. If she treats a prenup as an attack or an insult, she is telling you something real about how she sees the arrangement. That information is worth having before you sign anything. And for the men already in marriages, they are struggling inside. Stop carrying that silently under the idea that this is just what being a husband costs. Because it may not. It may be the cost of being married to the wrong person, or married without enough of yourself established first, or married in circumstances that have allowed the relationship to become something that only works in one direction. Some of those marriages, with genuine effort from both people, can actually be turned around, but some cannot. And the man who stays in something genuinely broken just to avoid the exit costs, while slowly losing his health and his sense of himself and his ability to be actually present for his kids, that man is paying a price every single day that no financial protection is worth. Marriage as an idea is not the problem. People choosing each other, building something together, committing and meaning it, that can work. That has worked. The problem is that the structure around it changed. The obligations men carry inside marriage stayed the same. Provide, protect, stay, show up, be steady. Those stayed. But the legal and financial landscape around those obligations shifted in ways that made the whole thing significantly riskier for men than it used to be. The exit became easier for one side. The financial exposure became heavier for the other. And the culture kept talking about it in the romantic version, the one where raising these questions means you are not ready, or not the right kind of man. These men are not the wrong kind of man. They are just paying attention to what is actually in front of them. More men than ever are choosing not to marry, not because they cannot connect, not because they do not want closeness or a real relationship, because they did the math. They watched what happened to the men around them. They saw how the story ends often enough to factor it into the decision. And they are making a different call. That is not a failure of character. That is a rational response to real information. I am not here to tell any man never to marry. I am here to tell every man to know what he is actually walking into before he walks into it. Know the legal structure. Know the financial exposure. Know what you are giving up. Know who you are choosing. and choose them deliberately, not because the moment swept you along or because the people around you expected it, because the moment passes, the contract stays. And if any of this hit close to home, if you are already inside a marriage that looks nothing like what you expected, or you are a younger man trying to honestly figure out whether this decision makes sense for you, drop it in the comments. Let other men know they are not the only one sitting with these questions, because one of the worst parts of all of this is how many men are carrying it completely alone, convinced they are the only one who feels this way. They are not even close. Subscribe because this channel will keep giving men the honest version of these conversations, not to make anyone angry, not to make anyone bitter, but because you deserve clear and straight information about the biggest decisions in your life without the romantic version layered on top to cover up what is actually underneath. That is what this is here for. Stay sharp.